Hi class, happy Monday. I wanted to do some read aloud from Charlotte's Web. You can see we're right around halfway through the book, and I figured it would be nice for you guys to see a familiar environment. I am in the classroom. And if you have Charlotte's Web at home, we're on chapter 14 called Dr. Dorian. In my book, it's page 105. It might be a little bit different in your books. All right, let's see where we were. So Templeton is getting words from the dump in order for Charlotte to write in her web. She wrote terrific, then she wrote radiant. You can see here's terrific. And Charlotte wanted Wilbur to run around and show off how radiant he was. So that's Wilbur shining in the sun. And then Charlotte told a tale about her cousin who caught a fish in their web. All right, I think that's right where we are. The next day was Saturday. Fern stood at the kitchen sink drying the breakfast dishes as her mother washed them. Mrs. Arable worked silently. She hoped Fern would go out and play with the other children instead of heading for the Zuckerman's barn to sit and watch the animals. "Charlotte is the best storyteller I ever heard," said Fern, poking a dry dish towel into her cereal bowl. "Fern," her mother said sternly, "you must not invent things. You know spiders don't tell stories. Spiders can't talk." "Charlotte can," replied Fern. "She doesn't talk very loud, but she talks." "Well, what kind of story did she tell?" asked Mrs. Arable. "Well," began Fern, "she told us about a cousin of hers who caught a fish in a web. Don't you think that's fascinating?" "Fern, dear, how would a fish get caught in a spider's web?" said Mrs. Arable. "You know it couldn't happen. You're making this up." "Oh, it happened all right," replied Fern. "Charlotte never fibs. This cousin of hers built a web across a stream, and one day she was hanging around on the web, and a tiny fish leapt into the air and got all tangled in the web. The fish was caught by one fin, Mother. Its tail was wildly thrashing and shining in the sun. Can't you just see the web sagging dangerously under the weight of the fish? Charlotte's cousin kept slipping in, dodging out, and was beaten mercilessly over the head by the wildly thrashing fish, dancing in, dancing out." "Fern," snapped her mother, "stop it. Stop inventing these wild tales." "I'm not inventing," said Fern. "I was just telling you the facts." "Well, what happened?" asked her mother, whose curiosity started to get the better of her. "Well, Charlotte's cousin won. She wrapped the fish up, and then she ate him when she got good and ready. Spiders have to eat the same as the rest of us." "Yes, I suppose they do," said Mrs. Arable vaguely. "Charlotte has another cousin who's a balloonist. She stands on her head, lets out a lot of line, and is carried aloft into the wind." "Mother, wouldn't you simply love to do that?" "Well, yes, I would, come to think of it," replied Mrs. Arable. "But Fern, darling, I wish you would play outdoors today instead of going to Uncle Homer's barn. Find some of your playmates. Do something nice outdoors. You're spending too much time in that barn. It isn't good for you to be alone so much." "Alone?" said Fern. "Alone? My best friends are in that barn cellar. It is a very sociable place, Mother. Not at all lonely." Fern disappeared after a while, walking down the road to the Zuckermans. Her mother dusted the sitting room. As she worked, she kept thinking about Fern. It just didn't seem natural for a little girl to be so interested in animals. Finally, Mrs. Arable made up her mind that she would pay a call to old Dr. Dorian and ask his advice. She got in the car and drove to his office in the village. Dr. Dorian had a thick beard, and he was glad to see Mrs. Arable, and he gave her a comfortable chair. "It's about Fern," she explained. "Fern spends entirely too much time in the Zuckerman's barn. It doesn't seem normal. She sits on a milk stool milk stool in a corner near the pig pen and just watches animals hour after hour. She just sits and listens. Dr. Dorian leaned back and closed his eyes. How enchanting, he said. It must be real nice and quiet down there. Homer has some sheep, hasn't he? Yes, said Mrs. Arble, but it really all started with her pig. We let Fern raise him on a bottle. She calls him Wilbur. Homer bought the pig, and ever since it left our place, Fern has been going to her uncle's to be near it. Oh, I've been hearing things about that pig, said Dr. Dorian, opening his eyes. They say he's quite a pig. Have you heard about the words that appeared in the spider's web? Asked Mrs. Arble nervously. Yes, replied the doctor. Well, do you understand it? Asked Mrs. Arble. Understand what? Do you understand how there could be any writing in a spider's web? Oh, no, Dr. Dorian said. I don't understand it. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle, but nobody pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. Really? Asked Mrs. Arble. What's so miraculous about a spider's web? I don't see why you say the web is a miracle. It's just a web. Really? Have you ever tried to spin one? Asked Dr. Dorian. Mrs. Arble shifted uneasily in her chair. No, she replied, but I can crochet a doily, and I can knit a sock. Sure, said the doctor, but somebody taught you, didn't they? So that's Mrs. Arble and Dr. Dorian. Well, yes, my mother taught me. Well, who taught a spider? A young spider knows how to spin a web without any instructions from anybody. Don't you regard that as a miracle? I suppose so, said Mrs. Arble. I never looked at it that way before. Still, I don't understand how those words got into the web. I don't understand it, and I don't like what I can't understand. None of us do, said Dr. Dorian, sighing. I'm a doctor. Doctors are supposed to understand everything. But I don't understand everything, and I don't intend to let it worry me. Mrs. Arble fidgeted. Fern says the animals talk to each other. Dr. Dorian, do you believe that animals can talk? I never heard anyone say anything about it, he replied. But just because I haven't heard an animal talk, it proves nothing. It's an old gnat trying to get me. That proves nothing. It's quite possible that an animal has spoken to me, and I just didn't catch the remark because I wasn't paying attention. Children pay better attention than grown-ups. If Fern says that the animals in Zuckerman's barn talk, I'm quite ready to believe her. Perhaps if people talked less, animals would talk more. People are incessant talkers. I can give you my word on that. Well, I guess I feel better about Fern then, said Mrs. Arble. You don't think I need to worry about her? Well, does she look well? Asked the doctor. Oh, yes. Appetite good? Oh, yes, she's always hungry. Sleep well at night? Well, yes. Then don't worry, said the doctor. Do you think she'll start thinking about something besides pigs and sheep and geese and spiders? How old is Fern? She's 8. Well, I think she'll always love animals. But I doubt she spends her entire life in Homer Zuckerman's barn cellar. How about boys? Does she know any boys? She knows Henry Fussy, said Mrs. Arble brightly. Dr. Dorian closed his eyes again and went into deep thought. Henry Fussy, he mumbled. Remarkable. Well, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Let Fern associate with her friends in the barn if she wants to. I would say, offhand, that spiders and pigs are fully as interesting as Henry Fussy. Yet, I predict that the day will come when even Henry will drop some chance remark that catches Fern's attention. It's amazing how children change from year to year. Oh, how's Avery? He asked, opening his eyes wide. Oh, Avery? Chuckled Mrs. Arble. Avery is always fine. Of course, he gets into poison ivy and gets stung by wasps and bees and brings frogs and snakes home, breaks everything he lays his hands on. He's fine. Good, said the doctor. Mrs. Arable said goodbye and thanked Dr. Dorian very much for his advice, and she felt greatly relieved. All right, let's see how many pages we have in our next chapter. Our next chapter is chapter 15 called The Crickets. It's short. Okay, so I'll read this one and then we'll be done. I'm on page 113 if you're following along. It's okay if you're not. The crickets sang in the grasses. They sang the song of summer's ending, a sad, monotonous song. Summer is over and gone, they sang. Over and gone, over and gone. Summer is dying, dying. The crickets felt like it was their duty to warn everybody that summertime cannot last forever. Even on the most beautiful days in the whole year, the days when summer is changing into fall, the crickets spread the rumor of sadness and change. Everybody heard the song of the crickets. Avery and Fern Arable heard it as they walked the dusty road. They knew that school would begin again. The young geese heard it and knew they would never be little goslings again. Charlotte heard it and knew that she hadn't much time left. Mrs. Zuckerman, at work in the kitchen, heard the crickets, and a sadness came over her too. Another summer gone, she sighed. Lurvy, at work building a crate for Wilbur, heard the song and knew that it was time to dig potatoes. Summer is over and gone, repeated the crickets. How many nights till frost, sang the crickets. Goodbye, summer, goodbye, goodbye. The sheep heard the crickets, and they too felt uneasy. They felt so uneasy that they broke a hole in the pasture fence and wandered up into the field across the road. The gander discovered the hole and led his family through, and they walked to an orchard and ate the apples that were lying on the ground. A little maple tree in the swamp heard the cricket song, and she turned bright red with anxiety. So as summer is coming to the end and fall is starting, maple tree is one of the trees that changes colors, and they turn this really bright red. Wilbur was now the center of attraction on the farm. Good food and regular hours were showing results. Wilbur was a pig any man would be proud of. One day, more than 100 people came to stand at his yard and admire him. Charlotte had written the word radiant, and Wilbur looked radiant as he stood in the golden sunlight. Ever since the spider had befriended him, he had done his best to live up to his reputation. When Charlotte's Web said, "Some pig," Wilbur tried to look like some pig. And when Charlotte's Web said, "Terrific," Wilbur had tried to look terrific. And now that the web said radiant, he did everything possible to make himself glow. It's not easy to look radiant, but Wilbur threw himself into it with a will. He would turn his head slightly and blink his long eyelashes. Then he would breathe deeply. And when his audience got bored, he would spring into the air and do a backflip with a half twist. And the crowd would yell and cheer. "How's that for a pig?" Mr. Zuckerman would cry to the crowd, well pleased with himself. "That pig is radiant." Some of Wilbur's friends in the barn worried, for all this attention would go to his head and make him stuck up. But it never did. Wilbur was modest. Fame did not spoil him. He still worried some about the future, and he could hardly believe that a mere spider would be able to save his life. Sometimes at night, he would have bad dreams. He would dream that men were coming to get him with knives and axes. But that was only a dream. In the daytime, Wilbur usually felt happy and confident. No pig had truer friends, and he realized that friendship is one of the most satisfying things in the world. Even the song of the crickets did not make Wilbur too sad. He knew it was almost time for the county fair, and he was looking forward to the trip. If he could distinguish himself at the fair and maybe win some prize money, he was sure Zuckerman would let him live. Charlotte had worries of her own, but she kept quiet about them. One morning, Wilbur asked her about the fair. "You're going with me, aren't you, Charlotte?" he said. "Well, I don't know," replied Charlotte. "The fair comes at a bad time for me. I shall find it inconvenient to leave home, even for a few days." "Why?" asked Wilbur. "Oh, I just don't feel like leaving my web. Too much going on around here. Please come with me, begged Wilbur. I need you, Charlotte. I can't stand going to the fair without you. You've got to come. No, said Charlotte. I believe I better stay home and see if I can't get some work done. What kind of work? Asked Wilbur. Egg laying. It's time I made an egg sack and fill it with my eggs. Well, I didn't know you could lay eggs, said Wilbur in amazement. Oh, sure, said the spider. I'm very versatile. What does versatile mean? Full of eggs? Asked Wilbur. Certainly not, said Charlotte. Versatile means I can turn with ease from one thing to another. It means I don't have to limit my activities to spinning and trapping. Well, why don't you come with me to the fairgrounds and lay your eggs there? Pleaded Wilbur. It would be wonderful fun. Charlotte gave her web a twitch and moodily watched it sway. I'm afraid not, she said. You do not know the first thing about egg-laying, Wilbur. I can't arrange my family duties to suit the management of the country fair. When I am ready to lay my eggs, I have to lay eggs, fair or no fair. However, I don't want you to worry about it. You might lose weight. We'll leave it this way. I'll come to the fair if I possibly can. Oh, good, said Wilbur. I knew you wouldn't forsaken me when I need you the most. All that day, Wilbur stayed inside, taking life easy in the straw. Charlotte rested and ate a grasshopper. She knew that she couldn't help Wilbur much longer. In a few days, she would have to drop everything and build the beautiful little sack that would hold her eggs. The next chapter is called Off to the Fair. And at the fair, it actually has my favorite song in it. So you know that we're watching little bits of the old movie? And then at the very end, we'll watch the whole new one. For the old movie, which you guys know is a musical, one of my favorite songs is when Templeton is at the fair. And I won't give anything away. If you've not read the book before, don't skip ahead. We will be doing read-alouds in these videos every few days, so that I'm sure by the time we get to see each other again, we'll be done with the book. And I will link to clips for the movie so that we can watch the old movie together. Okay, class, that's it for today. Today is Monday. In 2 days, teachers are going to be trained, so I'll have more information for you then. I want you to be reading every day, doing iReady every day, being kind to yourself, being kind to your parents, trying to keep clean, do your academics, and wash your hands. Okay, bye, class. See you tomorrow.